Muslims and you ask Jews and you ask historians and many New Testament theologian scholars, they will tell you that the basis for all of Christianity comes from Paul.
A common misconception among many Muslims and atheists is that Paul is the founder of Christianity and its beliefs. So, what do historical scholars actually say about Paul apparently creating Christianity? And what does the evidence suggest? To start off, it's important to establish that Paul knew the apostles of Jesus and interacted with them and their teachings. Now, it's very clear Paul was close to the apostles. For example, we read in Galatians chapter 1, verse 18 to 19. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas, Peter, and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none other of the apostles except James, the Lord's brother. We also read in Acts chapter 15, verse 2, this brought Paul and Barnabas into sharp dispute and debate with them. So Paul and Barnabas were appointed, along with some other believers, to go up to Jerusalem to see the apostles and elders about this question. What's important about this verse is that the author of Acts records that when Paul had a question about salvation, in this case whether or not someone needed to be circumcised to be saved, Paul goes to the apostles to clear up the issue. To further this concept, Paul traveled to the Jerusalem church to make sure his teachings were in line with the apostles. He writes in Galatians chapter 2, verse 1 to 2, then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up in response to a revelation. Then I laid before them, though only in a private meeting with the acknowledged leaders, the gospel that I proclaimed among the Gentiles in order to make sure that I was not running or had not run in vain. After he had relayed the gospel with them, the apostles confirmed his teaching. Paul states in verse 9, and when James and Cephas, Peter, and John, who were acknowledged pillars, recognized the grace that had been given to me, they gave to Barnabas and me the right hand of fellowship, agreeing that we should go to the Gentiles, and they to the circumcised. Furthermore, just to show even more evidence that Paul relies on earlier sources, that being the apostles, we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, a creed which predates Paul himself. As Paul says, he is passing on what he himself had received. We read in verse 3 to 7, for I handed on to you as of first importance what I in turn had received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Now, just how early does this creed date to before Paul? Historical scholar Richard Carrier, who doesn't even believe that Jesus existed historically, believes that there is good evidence this creed dates to the 30s AD. He states, in fact, the evidence for this creed dating to the very origin of the religion is amply strong, and there is no reasonable basis for claiming otherwise. New Testament scholar Gary Habermas even believes that Paul received this specific creed on his visit with the apostles. He states, I would concur with the scholars who believe Paul received this material 3 years after his conversion, when he took a trip to Jerusalem and met with Peter and James. Finally, after speaking about the death and resurrection of Jesus, Paul states in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 9 to 11, for I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me has not been in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we proclaim the resurrection, and so you believed. Therefore, from this verse, we can conclude that whether it was the apostles or Paul himself, they both proclaimed the death and resurrection of Jesus. Now, at the end of the day, Is it truly logical for Paul to create and invent the entire religion of Christianity and create his own theology, which eyewitnesses or apostles of Jesus disagreed with? How come the apostles never reprimanded Paul for teaching false Christology or theology? And why would Paul lie in his letters and claim that he teaches the same theology as the apostles, when anyone can fact check this claim with the apostles themselves? Such questions can never be answered when one thinks Paul created Christianity. Based on all this evidence, did Paul really create or found Christianity? Clearly not. This question really is not a problem for New Testament scholars. Bart Ehrman, who's one of the leading New Testament scholars, clears this up for us.
Some people say that Paul invented Christianity, and that can't be true because Paul was persecuting Christians before he became a Christian. And so if he invented Christianity, he would have had nobody to persecute. So that's not right. And it's not right that he invented the idea that Jesus' death and resurrection brought about salvation, because that's what Christians were saying before him.